Good afternoon and hello, good morning in other parts of the world. I am Amele Ekwe. I'm the Academic Dean of globeethics.net, and I have the privilege to welcome you to this first Blue Table webinar of the globeethics.net Academy. Professor Esther Mombo to offer us her response. Esther Mombo is teaching at the St. Paul's University in Limuru, Kenya. And we have a long-standing collegial relationship, and we exchanged during the first lockdown period last year already how this affects our professional lives and how we kind of have been challenged to change ourselves and to adapt in that regard. This is particularly from an educator's perspective, also, something that we were concerned about. How do we teach under these circumstances, and how can academic life continue? But we are also most interested in learning a little bit from you, Esther, how societal life has changed, and how the public health sector has reacted and has been able to cope with the pandemic situation. How does what Ross presented resonate with you against the background of your experiences? Thank you, Esther, for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I'm speaking from St. Paul's University, Limuru. It is afternoon and very good weather as our rainy season is starting soon, we hope. But I'm speaking from an institution that just opened in January, and we do have students. We have water and sanitizers around the university and labels everywhere, and we have students, younger students, with masks around. But sometimes I think they wear masks when they see an administrator, but after that they do not wear it. But I'll speak to that a bit more later. So thank you again for inviting me to participate in this, and thank you, Prof Ross, for that inspiring and challenging talk about the pandemic. The last quote is what sometimes we use in history, that those who don't remember the past, of course, do repeat it. And thank you for showing the source of it. So COVID-19, of course, is a global pandemic, as has been shown and as we know. And the rules to mitigate this pandemic at the level of the public health are at the same time localized in terms of how each context is going to mitigate the pandemic. It has been observed that sometimes these mitigations of the pandemic are skewed towards the particular class of people. That is a class that has access and a class that is able. And I'll say that a bit more. So social distancing, for example, how does it work in a crowded informal settlement or a crowded class of primary school students who have very little and have to be crowded together to study? So those mitigation processes are problematic for some and maybe not for others. And they do raise, of course, ethical issues. Why do some have and some do not have? So it is a year since COVID-19 was declared a pandemic, and our government, to stop the spreading of the pandemic, closed all schools and universities. So from March last year, to January, there was no on-site schooling. Teachers were advised to prepare work for students to do at home. However, it is clear that the lack of broadband internet and the cost of Wi-Fi in many of the remote areas and even within the urban centers limited the amount of e-learning that would be available for the students. The lockdown, as one of the measures to limit the spread of the pandemic, worked well for some social groups and not others. A mother in an informal settlement staying home, she argued, was not safe as she faced the danger in form of hunger and death. In fact, saying that before COVID-19 kills us, hunger would have killed us. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic impacted negatively on gender relations. And as we have seen both in our own country and in the world, the increase of gender-based violence and sexual gender-based violence. Of course, COVID-19 brought to light what we found as the deep disparities among people in form of what we saw as human greed, inequity, depletion, exploitation, confusion, rage, hate, and lack. These are reflected even to date in our own communities and even in our own academic institutions. An increase of fear, anxiety, and suspicion of each other because of the stigma for those that were positive. Of course, COVID-19 did cause social disruption of the practices that were very common to human society in a country like Kenya that is 80% religious worship services, whether they were church or mosque, were no longer the same. And leaders had to rethink on how best to offer those services. A few could organize online services, but if you didn't have internet, it wasn't possible. Because weddings and funerals, which is a social activity for many of the people, were also, which were would be attended by huge numbers of people, were disrupted. Only a few could attend when the processes of opening up were put into place. So questions such as how do you accompany each other at times of joy and even times of pain? And it's been observed that there's a lot of tension, a lot of pain that people are carrying, and which is leading to a lot of mental health issues. Talking about education, with the closure of universities and schools, we had to find other ways of offering learners an opportunity to continue. But COVID-19 brought to light the deep digital divide within the country, and I'm sure within the nations. So schools were expected to implement online instruction using technology and the internet, but teachers advised to prepare work for students to do at home. However, as I've noted, that the expenses of Wi-Fi, lack of broadband internet did not help many of the schools and majority of the schools. This was the same for primary, for high school, and for university. My university turned to e-learning, but clearly not many of our students at that time could access even what we were supposed to use. Some of the faculties were not even trained over the e-learning processes. So the cost of internet for universities and for families made many not to access any learning at all, especially for the first 6 months. Both parents and teachers, and even those who are able, did not have the hardware such as mobile devices or laptops or computers, and lack of training for parents and teachers was also pretty problematic. So one of the challenges in academic was this digital divide, And the digital divide was not just a technology divide, but also a socio-economic aspect of society. It was a revelation on how the class divide is about the minority who have access and the majority who do not have access at all. So when a measure to curb the disease is social distancing, of course, it was creating further social distancing in terms of affordability of the social amenities, as well as the social digital divide that was very, very glaring among institutions in one country. In academia, we've experienced an increase of gender-based violence and sexual gender-based violence among students, particularly an increase of child marriages or teenage pregnancies, and lots of female genital mutilation. We also experience an increase in substance abuse among adults, but also among students, leading to mental health issues. So the female gender particularly has had to struggle during this pandemic of lockdown, being locked down in spaces that they are not able to defend themselves, seeing lots of gender stereotypes aspects coming up to the fore. And so women and girls being vulnerable to that. In January, schools were opened, and some of the universities were opened, like even my own was opened. Schools were opened partly because exams had to be done in order to take students to the next level of learning. So we have had exams going on, especially for high schools, and universities catching up with the exams in order to move to the second stage so that new students can even attend. But we've also discovered that there are students who have not attended, they have not returned. And for female students, what we discover is most of them, either they got pregnant during the lockdown period and have not been able to return. This week, we are having exams of high school. And over the news, we've seen young students, 14 years, 15 years, having to drop out of an exam room to deliver a baby, or having to rush off to go and deliver a baby. So the experiences of these young mothers is yet to be captured. And it does raise, of course, ethical issues. It raises the forms of religiosity that we have, but also brings up challenges within both the educational, health, economic, and political sectors of the society. So how does one hold the tensions of restrictions and protection? Because a lockdown was intended to curb the spread of the disease. But within the lockdown, there was no sense of protection. Hence, some of the challenges that I have raised above. So the cases, for example, of gender-based violence was an indication that there was restriction, but there was no protection. How does one hold these two together in informal settlements or where there is lack of space? And how does one really support those within the marginalization? So, of course, one thinks of the ethics of care, and in putting down some of those ethics, I've seen the professor raising them. I've seen resilience within communities where parents and teachers have tried to innovate and to see that education has gone on, teachers visiting students. But ethics of care include, of course, aspects of thinking through issues around the legacies of patriarchy and sexism, and seeing how this impacts the educational spaces. And the ethics of care, of course, would include people to look at issues around justice. And justice demands transformation of relationships, whether they're economic or religious. It demands that aspects of love, equity, stewardship, trust, fairness come to the front. So the academics have struggled and continue to struggle, but it is those that are on the margins of society that have struggled even more. Thank you.